The fluorescent lights of the conference room hummed their familiar tune as I sat across from Richard Harmon, my boss of 3 years. It was a Tuesday afternoon, unremarkable in every way gray Seattle drizzle against the windows. The faint smell of lukewarm coffee from the morning meeting, the soft click of keyboards echoing through the hallways outside. I had expected this to be a routine one-on-one, the kind we'd had dozens of times before. A check-in on Q3 metrics, maybe some feedback on the Peterson account. Instead, Richard leaned back in his leather chair, steepled his fingers, and looked me dead in the eye. "Tell me your salary," he said. The words hung in the air between us like a physical object. I felt my throat tighten. Richard's gaze didn't waver, those pale blue eyes that could shift from grandfatherly warmth to glacial indifference in a heartbeat. The air instantly thickened with tension, as if someone had cranked down the atmospheric pressure in that small room. My palms, which had been resting flat on the mahogany table, suddenly felt clammy. "I'm sorry," I managed, buying time even though I'd heard him perfectly clearly. My mind raced through possibilities. Had I done something wrong? Was this some kind of test? In my 8 years of working in corporate environments, I'd learned that direct questions rarely meant straightforward inquiries. They were usually opening gambits in larger negotiations, power plays wrapped in the language of innocent curiosity. "Your salary," Richard repeated, his voice steady and measured. "What exactly are you making?" "The full number. I'd like to know." There it was, the question that no employee handbook tells you how to answer. The query that sits at the intersection of professional obligation and personal vulnerability. I felt my chest tighten as I realized that this innocuous request had just become a high-stakes standoff. The kind that threatened to expose uncomfortable truths about workplace power dynamics that we all pretended didn't exist. I'd been working at Meridian Solutions, a mid-sized management consulting firm, for 3 years. On paper, it was a good job. I had a decent title, senior analyst, a corner office with a view of Elliott Bay, and a salary that my parents always seemed impressed by when I mentioned it at family gatherings. But beneath that surface, I'd been accumulating evidence of inequity like a forensic accountant gathering receipts for tax fraud. 6 months earlier, I discovered that my colleague Derek, who had been hired at the same time and held the same title, was making $17,000 more than me annually. Derek, who spent most meetings texting under the table. Derek, who had required me to essentially retrain him on 3 separate projects. Derek, who, and this part stung most, had gotten his job through his uncle's connection to the firm's leadership. While I'd competed against 43 other candidates, I tried to let it go. Really, I had. I told myself that the salary difference was probably due to some negotiation skill I lacked, that it wasn't worth making a fuss about, that bringing it up would mark me as difficult or ungrateful. I'd internalized the cautionary tales we all tell ourselves about women who ask for more. They're too aggressive. They lack team spirit. They're not grateful for what they have. But the knowledge gnawed at me. Every time I saw Derek's name on an email thread, every time I watched him advance to a project I'd been hoping for, that number $17,000 echoed in my mind. So when Richard asked me to tell him my salary, my first instinct was to lie. To shave off a few thousand, to normalize the discrepancy, to make myself smaller so that the inevitable correction wouldn't sting as much. But I'd spent the last 6 months reading articles about workplace equity and watching podcasts about salary negotiation. I've been building myself up to this conversation, even though I hadn't expected it to come from him. I'm making $92,000 a year, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Base salary plus the typical benefits package. Richard nodded slowly, as if I just told him something he didn't already know. Of course he knew. He'd signed off on my hiring paperwork, approved my annual raises, controlled my compensation. The real question was why he was asking. And what do you think about that? He continued, leaning forward slightly. This was classic Richard asking questions that invited you to incriminate yourself, to volunteer information you could have kept private. It's acceptable, I said carefully. The word felt inadequate the moment it left my mouth. How could I convey 3 years of quiet frustration of watching my contributions get absorbed into the firm's profits while my bank account remained stagnant? How could I explain the precise alchemy of corporate life where competence is expected without being rewarded, where loyalty is punished with complacency?